I work at a Walmart in Alaska. The night staff vanishes weekly. The transfer. There's a Walmart in a remote corner of Alaska, so far north. You'd think even the dark avoids it. I didn't believe the stories when I first got the transfer. People said the night shift was cursed. Said employees disappeared. One every week. I figured it was small-town gossip. But that was before I walked through those sliding doors and realized the staff smiles didn't reach their eyes, and some of them were already gone. I was transferred to the Barrow, Alaska Walmart as a punishment. That's what my manager called it. He didn't say it directly, of course. He used corporate jargon, temporary reassignment, staffing shortages, great opportunity, but I knew the truth. I'd mouthed off one too many times at my old store in Portland, and they wanted me out of the way. I thought, fine. A few quiet months in a sleepy Arctic town, I could use the break. I arrived in Barrow, or at Reykjavik, as the locals still called it, just as winter's grip took hold. The sun had vanished beneath the horizon and wouldn't rise for weeks. The cold was bitter, the kind that sliced through your coat and gnawed on your bones. The Walmart sat on the edge of town, a concrete beast against a flat white wilderness. Snowdrifts piled high against its walls like waves crashing against a ship. Inside, the store was unervingly quiet. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and the air had a sterile stillness to it. You could almost hear the products aging on the shelves. I met the night manager, Harold, behind the customer service desk. He was thin, pale, and looked like he hadn't slept in days. His smile was forced, his eyes sunken. He barely looked at me as he handed over the schedule. "You'll start tonight," he said. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Aisle maintenance, stock check, standard duties. "Got it," I said. "Anything I should know?" He hesitated, just for a moment. "Stick to your tasks. Don't wander into closed-off sections. And when it gets quiet, really quiet, just keep working. Don't go looking for anyone." I waited for him to laugh. He didn't. My first shift felt normal enough. At first, the team was small. There was Liz, a soft-spoken woman who looked perpetually cold, bundled in layers despite the store's heating. Gary, a heavy-set guy with a nervous laugh and a constant hum under his breath. Angela, silent and intense, with darting eyes like a rabbit in a field full of foxes. No one talked much. When they did, it was only in short, clipped sentences. They didn't ask about me, didn't seem curious at all. At midnight, they all gathered for a 5-minute break in the employee lounge, but not a second longer. "We stick together," Liz told me quietly, eyes flitting toward the surveillance monitor above the microwave. "Always." I nodded, unsure what she meant. That first night, I noticed small things. The way the store music would cut out every hour on the dot, then resume with a different song. The mannequins in the clothing section, they were turned one way when I walked by and facing another when I passed again. Maybe it was my imagination or the sleep deprivation kicking in. At 2:14 a.m., the intercom crackled. "Security to aisle 17. Code black. Security to aisle 17. I looked at my team. "We don't have security," Gary said flatly. "Ignore it." A minute later, the lights above aisle 17 went out, one by one, in a domino pattern. Complete darkness swallowed the far end of the store. Angela muttered something under her breath and went back to stacking soup cans. I didn't sleep when I got home. The second night, I found Gary's cart abandoned outside the walk-in freezer. The wheels were still turning. I called his name. No answer. When I turned the corner, he was back at the pallet station, humming like nothing had happened. But when I asked him where he went, he stared at me blankly, like he didn't remember leaving at all. Later that night, Liz approached me in the break room. Her eyes darted to the security camera before she leaned in. "You need to start keeping a journal," she whispered. Write everything down. Everything you see, everything you hear. Even if it sounds crazy, it's the only way to know what's real. I asked her why. Because this place doesn't play by the rules. Not anymore. Night 3 is when I started to understand. The loudspeaker screamed at 3:33 a.m. Not a message. A scream. Human, high-pitched, terrified. It echoed through every aisle like it had been caught in the ventilation system and forced through the speakers. We all froze. Angela bolted. Liz cursed and ran after her. I stood there like an idiot, heart hammering, not sure whether to follow or hide. Then something passed by the far end of aisle 12. A shadow, tall and lanky. It didn't walk. It glided, as if gravity were just a rumor. It turned its head, slowly. It had no face, just a smooth stretch of skin, like someone had erased it with a rubber. I ran the other way. I didn't stop until I locked myself in the maintenance closet, huddled between buckets and bleach, trying not to breathe too loud. The screaming stopped as suddenly as it started. In the morning, Angela was gone. Shift change, Harold said when I asked. She transferred. To where? Doesn't concern you. I looked at Liz. Her face was pale. One every week, she said. That's the pattern. What is? She leaned in. Someone disappears. They don't come back. We report it as a transfer or termination, and we keep going. Management doesn't investigate. They know. They just won't say it out loud. I didn't believe her. Not fully. Not yet. But then I checked the locker room. Angela's locker was empty, like she'd never been there. That night, the power flickered at 1:47 a.m. Not a total outage, just a flicker, but when it came back on, all the lights were tinted faint blue. Everything looked sickly. Wrong. That's when I started hearing the footsteps. They echoed from the back of the store, measured, deliberate, too heavy to be anyone from our crew. But no one was there. I turned every aisle, every storage rack. Nothing. Then I heard someone whisper my name. Not in my ear. In my head. Just barely. I ran to the lounge and found Liz and Gary already there, pale and wide-eyed. You heard it too? I asked. They nodded. We stayed there until dawn. On the 7th night, Gary disappeared. His last words to me were, if it calls your name, don't answer. Even in your head. That's how it gets in. I asked what it was. He just said, you'll know. I've worked a week of nights at the Barrow Walmart. 2 employees are gone. There's something in the store that moves through the dark, wears no face, and whispers names like invitations. It's not a ghost. It's not a person. It's something worse. And tonight, I work alone. The phantom shift. When the power flickered back on, something was different. The aisles were wrong. Too narrow, too long. The shelves stocked with items we didn't sell. And the cameras? They weren't just watching anymore. They were following. That night, I realized the store wasn't just haunted. It was alive, and it was hungry. The flicker only lasted a second, maybe 2. But when the lights stabilized, everything had shifted. I was still in aisle 12, or I thought I was. The product labels were warped, fonts wrong, names misspelled, as if written by someone who'd only heard of English. One box of cereal was called Brackflix Crunch, with real flesh bites. I blinked hard. The second time I looked, it was just Frosted Flakes. I spun around. The end of the aisle was twice as far away as it had been before. The ceiling fixtures buzzed louder. The air was heavier. I wasn't alone anymore. I saw the thing again, down by the frozen section. The faceless shadow gliding between freezers, long limbs dragging behind it like puppet strings. It paused every few seconds, its head turning sharply, as if scanning. And then, its head tilted, not toward me, but toward the ceiling, like it was listening to something above us. I backed away slowly, ducking behind a cardboard display of Halloween candy. My hand brushed something sticky. I looked down and saw that the lollipops were wet. melted, even though it was -20 outside. I looked up, and the thing was gone. But the reflection on the freezer door was still staring back. At 3 a.m., I found Liz and Gary sitting silently in the break room. The vending machine light flickered, casting a pale, sickly glow across their faces. "I saw it again," I said. They didn't ask what it was. Liz looked at the wall clock. "It's early." "Early for what?" "Gary's on broke. For the next one." I sat down. "Angela. She didn't transfer, did she?" Liz shook her head. "She was taken by that thing." "It's not just one thing," she said quietly. "The store changes after dark. It opens up. Opens up to what?" She looked at me like she wanted to say more, but then the intercom popped. "Clean up on aisle 6. Repeat, clean up on aisle 6. The voice was wrong. Too slow, too deep, and too old. Like someone had dug up a tape from decades ago. "We don't go to aisle 6, Gary whispered. "I've worked that aisle." "No," Liz said, standing. "You've worked the real one." They told me about the phantom shift. That's what they called it. It always started the same way. A flicker of lights around 1:45 a.m. Shelves rearranging. Products changing. Then the loop would begin. 8 aisles that didn't exist during the day. Spaces you couldn't find on a floor plan. People who didn't belong. Liz said one night she watched a man in a Walmart vest walk out of the stockroom and head straight into the frozen food section, where he vanished into the freezer wall. Just walked through it like mist. He didn't have a face either, she added. None of them do. Later that night, I saw a woman in a bright blue employee vest I didn't recognize. Blonde, tall, eyes too wide. She was staring into a mirror mounted in the cleaning aisle. Except, there's no mirror in the cleaning aisle. I approached slowly. "Hey, are you lost?" She didn't answer, just kept staring. Then, without turning, she spoke. "Do you know your schedule yet?" I stopped. "What?" She smiled. Her teeth were wrong. Too many. Too sharp. "You will," she said. Then she walked into the mirror. Through it. And I swear, I saw myself on the other side. Looking back, at 4:11 a.m., Liz handed me a worn black notebook. The cover was cracked, pages warped with water stains and ink smears. "Found it in an old locker 2 months ago," she said. "Don't know who it belonged to, but it's got answers." I flipped through it. Sketches of the store's layout, with extra aisles sketched in pencil. Maps with arrows pointing to doors that don't exist. Notes written in frantic, looping handwriting. "Don't answer the intercom after 2 a.m. Mannequins move when you're not looking. Check the time. IT lies. If you see a customer after midnight, it's already too late." One line was circled over and over. "The store is feeding." When the shift ended, I bolted for the exit, but the front doors didn't open. They just stood there, frozen shut. The sensor blinked red. Harold stood behind me, sipping coffee. "You get used to it," he said. "What do you mean used to it?" "This place is." I said you'd start at 10 p.m., he interrupted. "I didn't say when you get to leave. The doors open then." But something told me they didn't do it for me. That morning, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the intercom echo in my apartment. "Clean up on aisle 6. Over and over. And when I looked in my bathroom mirror, just for a second, I saw a blonde woman staring back at me, smiling. I used to think I could handle anything, that every job was just numbers, hours, policy. But this place, it doesn't follow any rules. Something ancient is stitched into its concrete. It's watching us, wearing the shape of a Walmart. And it's only just begun to notice me. Next week, someone else will vanish. But I'm not waiting around. I'm going to find out what's behind aisle 6, even if it kills me. Aisle 6 is always wet. Aisle 6 doesn't show up on the morning reports. Cameras go dark when you walk into it. And the floor is always wet, no matter the time, no matter the weather. I should have listened when Liz told me to stay away. Because last night I went in, and I saw what feeds the store. I waited until 3:07 a.m. That's when the lights flickered the longest. That's when the store started changing. The temperature dropped. You could feel the air stretch, like the walls themselves were breathing. I checked the cameras from the backroom console. Most were normal. But Cam 14, aisle 6, was black. Not frozen. Not glitched. Just off. I grabbed my flashlight and left the safety of the break room. I passed Gary on the way. He was crouched in the produce section, whispering to a pile of apples. "You can hear them, can't you?" he muttered. I didn't ask. The auto sensor lights above aisle 6 didn't turn on when I arrived. It was almost pitch black. My flashlight beam barely cut through the dense air. The floor was soaked, like it had just rained indoors. But there were no leaks. No broken pipes. I looked up. The ceiling above aisle 6 had no lights. No panels. Just a wide, open blackness. An empty void. I stepped forward, and the floor squelched beneath my shoe. Something was dripping. I followed the sound. Left side of the aisle, next to the bargain bin filled with discounted soap. The items were wrong again. Bars of soap labeled skin wash, for removal only. A bottle of bleach that read, "I cleanse. Do not inhale." And on the top shelf, a VHS tape. No label. Just a yellow sticker with my name, handwritten in red ink. Nick. I didn't put it there. No one knew my full name here. Not even Liz. I reached for it, and the dripping stopped. Then something hissed behind me. I turned, expecting to see another mannequin or maybe one of the faceless shadows. But no, this was different. A person stood at the far end of the aisle, drenched, hair stuck to her face, wearing the same uniform I was. Same name tag, same face. It was me, but wrong. The skin sagged, eyes hollowed out, limbs too long. My twin opened her mouth, and water poured out. Gallons of it, crashing to the floor like a waterfall, flooding the aisle in seconds. The VHS in my hand burned cold. My twin stared without blinking. Then, in a voice that gargled through water, "You're late." I ran. The water chased me like it had a will of its own, licking at my heels as I slipped into aisle 5. When I looked back, aisle 6 was dry again. Bone dry. Not a single drop left behind. My clothes, though, were still soaked. My shoes squished with every step. I didn't tell Liz that night. She already looked worse than usual. Dark circles under her eyes, hands trembling. When I passed her in the break room, she muttered something I couldn't quite make out. "Don't sleep in mirrors." Back at home, I locked every door, turned on every light. I stared at the VHS for hours before finally giving in. I borrowed an old player from a neighbor and popped in the tape. At first, it was just static. Then footage began. A security cam view of aisle 6. Dated 2 nights from now. It showed me, walking in, alone, flashlight in hand, just like tonight. But in the footage, I didn't leave. I just kept walking into the shadows. And then I split. 2 of me. 3. Dozens. Each one worse than the last. Rotting. Drowning. Melting. Until the last version looked directly at the camera and smiled. I unplugged the VCR. Burned the tape. Didn't matter. The TV kept turning on by itself. Always to static. Always with that faint, watery sound underneath. The next shift, Liz was gone. Not vanished. Transfer, they said. No one remembered her last name. No one found her locker key. Her name tag was hanging on the break room wall. The plastic bent, warped like it had been submerged. When I asked Harold about it, he just shrugged. People come and go. That's the night shift. I noticed something on the break room TV then. It was paused on a frame. Looked like security cam footage. Liz, standing in aisle 6. Alone. And behind her, me. I needed answers. So I went to the back hallway. Past the inventory cages. past the storage room labeled "Do Not Open, Retired Stock." Behind a panel was the access key for the old office, a place Harold said didn't exist anymore, but it does. And inside was another notebook, just like the one Liz gave me. Different handwriting. This one was titled, "Employees Who Never Left." And I found a page marked with my name, with tomorrow's date. Circled. Aisle 6 changes every time you go in. Sometimes it's a graveyard. Sometimes a drowning pool. Sometimes a mirror. But it's always hungry. Now I know it doesn't just take people. It copies them. Uses them. And I think it's getting ready to replace me. There's still time. I have one night left to find out where the real employees went. Where Liz is. What's hiding behind the freezers, beneath the floor, inside the intercom. I'm going back in. And I'm bringing a crowbar. Do not open. Retired stock. Last night, I pried open the door labeled "Do Not Open. Retired stock." Inside was a room colder than death. And I think I found where the missing employees went. But they didn't just disappear. They were stored. I waited until 3:07 a.m. again. The moment the lights flickered. The moment the whispers started over the loudspeakers. Only this time, they weren't random. They said my name. Softly. Repeated. Nick. Nick, aisle 6 to aisle 6. But I didn't go there. Not this time. Instead, I grabbed the key card I found hidden behind a loose tile in the manager's office. A tile marked at Thomas, one of the first employees listed in the Employees Who Never Left notebook. And I headed for the back hallway. The hallway was silent. Too silent. Even the hum of the fluorescents died once I reached the end. The "Do Not Open, Retired Stock" door was unassuming. Rusted metal, bolted from the outside, scratches on the frame, like someone had tried to claw their way out. I slid the key card. Nothing. I tried again. Click. The door creaked open. A blast of freezing air hit me in the face. My flashlight flickered violently but held. The room beyond wasn't a stockroom. It was a morgue. Rows and rows of industrial freezers lined the walls, dozens of them, labeled not with product codes, but with names. Thomas S. Moreno, L. Darnell, Gary. Yes, Gary. The guy who whispers to apples and produce. But I'd seen him last night. I opened the door labeled Gary. Inside was Gary, his body stiff, eyes open, covered in frost, but alive. His mouth twitched. I leaned closer. He whispered, "Not me, not me. I'm still in the store." The real Gary was frozen. So who, or what, was the Gary talking to apples? My stomach dropped. I checked the next few doors. Same story. People I'd seen around the store. Laughing, cleaning, stocking shelves. They were all here. Store-like inventory. Then I reached the last freezer. It didn't have a name. Just a sticker. New stock, Nick. It was empty. And waiting. Suddenly, the lights shut off. My flashlight died. Pitch black. Then breathing. Behind me. Wet, gurgling breathing. I turned. And there it was. Me. But more twisted than before. Taller. Eyes glassy and milky white. Limbs bending the wrong way. It grinned. Water gushed from its mouth, soaking the floor around it. It spoke with a voice like clogged drains. "Your shift ends soon, Nick. Time to clock out." I ran, slamming the freezer shut as it lunged. The thing howled, a sound like pressure valves releasing. I ducked into the maintenance closet down the hall, heart hammering in my chest. The crowbar trembled in my hands. I finally understood. Whatever's running this Walmart isn't human. It doesn't hire employees. It grows them, copies them, uses the store as a farm, for replacements, for food, for experiments. And when someone starts to notice, they become retired stock. I waited in that closet until morning. At exactly 7 a.m., the lights came back on. The whispers stopped. The frost melted from the walls. I snuck out, past Harold, who smiled too widely, and clocked out early. The sky was a sickly orange as I walked to my car. I glanced back one last time. A woman stood in the front window, drenched, identical to me. She waved. At home. I dug deeper into the notebook. On the final page, scribbled in shaky handwriting, "When they finish your copy, it replaces you. Then your mind gets stored, like a backup drive. You forget. You forget until you're them." It all clicked. That's why no one remembers what happened. Why Liz started to slip. Why Gary talked to Fruit. They're not losing their minds. Their minds are being overwritten. And mine is next. Tonight, I'm not running. I'm going back with gasoline, lighters, bolt cutters, and every notebook I've found. I'm burning the retired stock room to the ground. And then I'm dragging every copy into the light. Because the thing in aisle 6, it isn't a ghost. It isn't a curse. It's a system. And this store is just one of many. The final shift. This is it. My last shift. One way or another. Ends tonight. I've seen the freezers. I've seen the copies. I've seen my name on the door. I'm not going to vanish quietly. 8:52 p.m. Clocking in. I pulled up to the store with a full tank of gas, a jerrycan in the trunk, bolt cutters, a crowbar, and 3 lighters in my pockets. I parked far from the cameras. Didn't even bother clocking in the usual way. I scanned in with Thomas's card. Figured if the system already had a Nick scheduled tonight, I might as well be a ghost. Harold stood by the employee entrance. He smiled. "Welcome back. You're early." His voice sounded wrong. Too fluid. Like it was trying to match a pitch it couldn't quite hold. I nodded and walked past. Didn't speak. He didn't blink. 10:17 p.m. Searching the upper offices. The store was quiet, dead quiet. More than usual. Even the muzak was silent. I crept into the upper management area. There were more tiles loose in the ceiling. More names. Dozens of them. Each one with a card, a photo, and a sticky note with the word "complete" or "in progress." My name, "in progress." Final copy, nearly stable. I pocketed the sticky note. I don't know why. Maybe as proof. Maybe because part of me still doesn't believe this is real. In the back of the manager's office was a map. Not of the store, but of multiple stores. All in remote locations. All with similar anomalies. Sudden staff disappearances. Erratic employee behavior. Power anomalies. Customer unreliability. And a recurring internal code. Arctic model. Gen 7. Testing. What the hell is this? A testing site? A manufacturing facility? 12:03 a.m. The duplicates begin to wander. They come out at midnight. Not all at once. Just a few, drifting down the aisles like forgotten mannequins. Only, they're not forgotten. They're watching. Each one slightly wrong. Too stiff. Too wet. Eyes that don't reflect light. I see Liz again. She waves. Her fingers are warped, jointed twice where they shouldn't be. She opens her mouth, and a chorus of voices spills out. "Omi, Nick, come stock with us." I ran. 1:11 a.m. Retired stockroom. The door was sealed again. Heavily. 3 padlocks. A chain. A freshly printed sign. Employees only. Do not disturb sleeping stock. I cut the locks. One by one. The sound echoed through the back hall like a gunshot. I didn't care. Inside, the freezers were humming. Louder than before. The temperature had dropped to unbearable levels. Frost coated the walls. Every freezer door now had a new name. Some I recognized. Some were new. Some were future tense. Nick, final. Harold, replacement ready. Manager, TBA. I pried open my own door. Inside was me. Curled. Naked. Breathing shallow. I stared at myself. I want to scream. But the copy opened its eyes. "Don't," it whispered. "They'll hear." 1:23 a.m. Fire. I dumped the gasoline over every freezer, lit a trail leading back to the hallway, and I set on fire. The flames caught fast, unnaturally fast. The room roared to life with screams, hisses, whispers, some mechanical, some distinctly human. Smoke filled the halls, but I didn't stop. I dragged bodies, real ones, Gary, Liz, a few others whose pulses still beat faintly beneath the frost. They weren't dead. Not yet. 1:55 a.m. Collapse. As I wheeled Gary toward the exit, the store shifted. That's the only word I have for it. The walls bent inward like soft wax. The floors rippled like liquid. Shelves collapsed. Products melted. And something massive rose from the loading bay. A tangle of limbs. Faces. Scanners. Name tags. One gaping maw full of fluorescent light and mirrored plastic. It spoke with every voice in the store. You are not cleared to terminate the program. I didn't answer. I just rolled Gary into the snow and lit the second fuse. The entire back half of the Walmart exploded in a plume of black fire and shattering glass. 3:06 a.m. outside. The snow was red with flame and ash. Sirens were in the distance, but slow, like they didn't really want to arrive. I dragged what I could into the tree lane. Gary, one other, my stolen notes. The Walmart burned silently behind me. No one screamed. No one came out. Only Harold, who stood in the firelight, half melted, watching. He didn't chase. He just said, in a voice full of static, "Another store will open." And then he stepped backward into the flames. 4:12 a.m. cabin. I'm holed up in a ranger's cabin now. No phone signal, but I have the notebook, the photos, the sticky notes, and myself, still breathing, still me. I think they'll look for me. I know they will, because I burned down one of them. But if what I saw is true, if all those pins on the map were more Walmarts just like mine, then we're already surrounded. Each store is a hatchery, each employee a product, and each night shift a harvest. If you're reading this, and you just got hired at a Walmart in the middle of nowhere, don't clock in. Burn your uniform, destroy your badge, and run. Because the moment you punch that time card, you've already been replaced. End of story.